Sikhs have lived and worshipped in the U.S. for over 100 years and have the world's fifth largest religion, but remain nearly invisible in our community. My name is Mark Comer. I'm an ordained deacon for the Diocese of Davenport and a student at St. Ambrose University, speaking specifically for a communications class assignment. Listening to the national conversation regarding tolerance and acceptance of people and religion, it might surprise those in the Quad City area to learn that right here in our Midwest corn-growing, farm machinery-building community, live and worship most every recognized faith in the world. Also that in that mix is included a much misunderstood community of believers following the Sikh religion in a small building barely visible off of 53rd Street in Davenport. And Sikh, I believe, is the proper pronunciation. It is spelled S-I-K-H. It is becoming more important than ever that we show an interest in becoming educated of the many cultures, religions, and peoples in the world, as it is ignorance that breeds fear, fear that breeds prejudice, prejudice that leads to acts of humanity. It would also be good for us to become empathetic to the cries of those wronged by such acts. As I mentioned, Sikhs have lived and worshipped in the U.S. for over 100 years and have the world's fifth largest religion, but are nearly invisible in our community, partially because they're a small group, but maybe also because we, their neighbors, aren't comfortable reaching out and intentionally learning about what might seem very different from what we know. I worked for Menards in Davenport a year ago part-time, and while I was working there, I was mixing paint, and I saw this man, a Sikh priest, looking for paint a couple of times, and asked if I could visit the Sikh temple. I was able to interview a friend of his and a worshiper at the temple that speaks English, allowing me to learn a little bit about their faith and how they worship. So first, I'm going to describe my meeting with Prem, becoming a friend of his. I'll examine in very minute detail, or very little detail actually, the Sikh faith, and then I'm going to attempt to discuss with you a little bit about the meeting that I had there, the visit that I had there a little over a week ago. I was pleased to find that the final speech for this class was a speech asking that I visit a topic that I'm a little bit familiar with, religion, and that I have a heart for, but also ethnic diversity coupled with an interest in making friends with new people. These are things that I've long had an interest in and enjoy quite a bit. Prem walked into Menards, like I said, a little over a year ago, dressed entirely in white, wearing a turban, had a small sheathed knife on his belt, and was sporting a very long white beard. He couldn't have looked more out of place if he had a live fish nailed to his forehead. A co-worker pleasantly addressed him, letting him know he would be right with him, and by Prem's response it was obvious that he didn't speak very much, if any, English. It would have been very easy for me to ignore Prem and allow someone else to help him, as it was near the end of my shift. And it was going to take a lot of work. I had another guest that I was working with, so I could have very easily validated my ignoring him. Instead, I hurried to get done and intentionally waited on him. And it wound up taking nearly 45 minutes for us to pick out two colors and mix 2 quarts of paint. But it was obviously an important job because based on the pictures that Prem was showing me on his phone, we were going to be picking out colors that he was going to be using to paint a worship space. So this was an important task. Our communication was very limited by his lack of English. And yet we were able to communicate, mostly using nonverbals like head nodding and smiles and general acknowledgement of those things that were right and acknowledgement of those things that weren't. But I was able to learn, most especially while his paint was mixing, that he was not Muslim, that he was a priest of the Sikh faith, and that he's originally from India. Um, Something else I want to share is that while his paint was mixing, um, we were quite busy in our little area there, and all around him stood people, and he wasn't able to see their faces. He was focused on me, but as I was trying to communicate with him, all of these other people were able to watch, and it was it was hard to watch uh, how they were obviously very, I don't want to say disgusted, but they seemed almost disgusted. Um, not They were showing signs of disapproval and even dislike, really. Made me very uncomfortable, and I really can't imagine how it would have made him feel if he were able to have seen all of that. Following my interaction with him that day, though, I couldn't wait to get home to my computer because I wanted to Google the Sikh faith. I wanted to learn a little bit about it. I wanted to look and see if I couldn't find anything about the Sikhs in our community, and I was able to a little bit, and I'm going to share some of that with you then. The religion began in the 1400s. I was given as a revelation to Guru Nanak. Nanak. Guru Nanak's writings became the beginning of a collection of sacred writings that the religion worships, followed by the additions of 9 more prophets' writings and sayings and teachings. The final prophet, the 10th prophet, said that that would be the end of the revelation. There would be no more prophets, and so it has been. That's the end of the writing. Guru Gobind Singh, somewhere in the middle of all of these 10 prophets, felt inspired to peacefully combat the caste society that exists in India, and also some of the problems that existed between Muslims and Hindus. Some of the ways that he did these things, it became very common for all of the men to have the same last name and all of the women to have the same last name. Hence, Prem Singh, all of the men's last name would have been Singh. How in recent years that's not as common. Some have moved the Singh to their middle name and have adopted their last names. But some of the things that the Sikhs believe, they believe in one God. They believe that God lives in all of us, so all are treated as God, which I think is very important. The way that Prem was dressed is very important. Everything about his dressing was important to his faith, from the reality that once he's made this initiation, this commitment to initiation as a priest in that religion, he is no longer able to cut his hair, any of his body hair, so he has a really long beard, a really long hair, but his hair is kept up by a comb, a special comb. The comb is indicative of the 5 markers of his faith. The turban that covers the head. Also the little knife that I mentioned that would be on the belt, as well as the white clothes and undergarments. All of these point to purity, social justice, and commitment to God. Not everyone I mentioned is required to do this, only those who desire to make that special commitment. And becoming a priest in that religion does not mean that you're clergy. I mentioned that it's the 5th largest religion in the world, with 25 million members, which really surprised me. But many non-Sikhs also follow the teachings of the Gurus. The religion preaches remembrance of God at all times, truthful living, equality between all human beings, social justice, and it also emphatically denounces any superstitions and any blind rituals. Another interesting point, I mentioned that the priests aren't clergy. There's really no clergy, and they look at men and women as completely equal. Women can lead the prayer services as well as men, even though in this particular place that I went this last weekend, they were sitting on opposite sides of the entrance. That's not a mandatory thing. It's just convenience. So I've kind of quickly looked at some of the aspects of the Sikh faith, and I'm going to tell you about my visit to a Sikh temple. Last week, Sunday, I didn't announce that I was coming. Um, I'm not really sure if I called to the temple and spoke with Prem Singh if he would be able to understand what I was saying to him anyway. So I decided I would just show up. I looked at the website and determined that they generally meet at 11 o'clock, so I went a half an hour early. I found that they were already praying when I got there. Kind of a disappointment, but really it worked out just fine. The reason that they were already there is they'd been there all weekend. They were honoring the date of the martyrdom of one of the prophets, one of the gurus, so had been reading from this sacred book for 72 straight hours, all through the day and the night, and we're nearing the end of this worship experience. When I got there was a young man that happened to be about to enter the worship space, which was very nice because then he was able to show me where to put my shoes and help me put a scarf on my head, explain to me that when I entered the room that it was going to be necessary that I bow, and then that I could go sit anywhere that there was an open spot on the floor. I did sit up against the wall because I don't sit cross-legged well. I noticed immediately that Prem was there. Prem was playing the small hand drum, and there was a priest that was singing and using this organ with a baffle on the back. My translator friend was there also. He was in attendance, so I was made to feel welcome immediately. And I should point out, if I haven't already, people are always welcome. Anybody is welcome anytime to come in. Prem was very, very happy to see me. Shortly after I got there, though, he stopped playing the drum as though it were some part of the worship experience that was to change. He stood up and took a bowl and moved around the room, handing a small amount of a loose cookie type dough mixture to everybody, handed it to me as well, and said that it is sweet. And it was, although the flavor was rather mild. This must have marked then the next phase of worship, because we then took a break and went to the basement, the lower level of the building, where there was a communal kitchen, and we participated in an important part of their worship that involves a communal meal called langar. This was prepared by members of their community the day before. Everybody donates the food, and it's then offered to whoever arrives. There were a number of different types of items. I won't go into great length to explain them. My sense was, again, though, that they were all very mild in flavor. After a time in the level down below, everybody's sitting on the floor. It was then time to go back upstairs. Singing began. Again, it was just the two men, the drummer and the singer. I couldn't tell you what they were singing or saying. There was a time where it seemed as though there was a sermon given. The reason that I couldn't understand is because the only language that's spoken during the worship ceremony is Punjabi. But that didn't make it a bad experience. Not knowing what was being said added a little mysticism to the experience and made it that much more exciting. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, the Sikhs have lived and worshipped in the U.S. for over 100 years and have the world's fifth largest religion, and are nearly invisible in our community. But we can help make them and others like them less afraid of standing out, more comfortable as members of our community. And I'd like you to consider the following. You might remember that in August of 2012, there was a shooting in the Oak Creek Community Sikh Temple in a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A shooter by the name of Wade Michael Page, a white supremacist, walked in on a Sunday morning during their worship there and started shooting, killing 6 innocent people. And his only excuse for being in this building at this particular time on this particular day was that he thought he was shooting Muslims. In our country, Muslims and Sikhs have lived and worshipped peacefully for over a century, living right next to people of other cultural backgrounds and faith traditions, shopping in the same stores, driving on the same roads, attending the same schools, paying the same taxes, voting for the same representation, just like every other U.S. and Quad City citizen. You know, I wasn't afraid to go see Prem Singh. Wasn't afraid to go see him at his temple. And he was so happy to see me there, he hugged me so hard. And he couldn't stop smiling. It was a very warm, inviting smile. One of the reasons I wanted to help him when I met him at Menards that time. I'll bet it's the exact same smile that he gave to Wade Michael Page when Prem first saw him walk through the door at the Oak Creek Community Temple in August 2014.